Hello, sleepy dreamer. How you doing? Tonight I'll be your guide, here to ease you into calm, restful sleep. Before we get started, remember to like the video and subscribe so you won't miss future scary bedtime stories. Share in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is. Also, let me know if there's a story you'd love to hear next. I never imagined working as a flight attendant would one day fuel my darkest nightmares. Outsiders assume our job is glamorous, jetting across continents, strolling through new cities, enjoying discounted flights. In truth, it's grueling. Endless shifts, stale air, impatient passengers, constant delays, and feet that ache as though made of stone. My name is Elena Rivera. I'm 27, and I work for Cascadia Airways, a mid-sized carrier headquartered in Portland, Oregon. I had been with the airline for nearly 4 years when everything changed. The memory of that night replays in my mind endlessly. Writing it down is my only way of assuring myself it truly happened, though deep down I know no one else would ever believe it. It began on an overnight run from Chicago to Vancouver. I hadn't originally aspired to this career. I studied communications in college with hazy ambitions of breaking into media, but life rarely bends to our plans. During my senior year, my mother grew ill, and I needed work that allowed me the freedom to fly home to care for her. A friend suggested becoming a flight attendant. The pay was decent, the schedule adjustable, the benefits steady. I thought it would be temporary. Yet 4 years later, I was still here. Most nights, I'd grown to appreciate the routine: boarding announcements, safety checks, distributing meals, casual conversations with passengers who weren't overly drunk or irritable. Though overnight flights strained my body, they were sometimes smoother than noisy daytime ones packed with restless children. But that particular October week, I was running on fumes. My schedule bounced me from Denver to Chicago to Dallas, then back again. There was hardly enough time in hotel rooms to recall what city I had just left. My final leg was the red-eye back to Vancouver. Afterward, I'd finally have 2 full days at home. That promise alone kept me moving. We started boarding at about 11:15 p.m. I was posted mid-cabin to welcome travelers. My hair was pulled back tight in company regulation, my lips stretched and the practiced polite smile drilled into us. Most passengers trudged on board with weary expressions. Business people in rumpled suits, college students lugging backpacks, families with children already half asleep. Nothing unusual stood out until she appeared. Perhaps mid-30s. Her skin looked pale, almost wax-like. Her black hair was twisted into a bun, pulled so tight it seemed to stretch her features unnaturally. Her eyes were too wide, held open in a way that felt deliberate, as if she refused to blink. She carried nothing. No purse, no carry-on, not even a phone in her grasp. She walked down the aisle with a faint smile, locking eyes with me and never breaking that stare as she passed. A sick feeling rolled through me. Most people give a quick glance, sometimes a brief smile, or nothing at all. But her gaze cut straight through me. She sat in seat 14C, the middle. I logged it instinctively. Part of our training is noting unusual passengers and where they sit. Roughly 20 minutes after we lifted off, I began my routine cabin walk. The cabin lights had dimmed. Passengers were already settling into blankets, headphones snug. When I approached row 14, she sat perfectly upright, her hands folded neatly in her lap. As I passed, her head rotated toward me slowly. That same strange smile plastered across her face. "Everything all right, ma'am?" I whispered in my professional tone. She tilted her head. "You look tired." I forced a small laugh. "It's been a long week." Her voice dropped again. "You seem like someone who dreams a great deal but keeps it secret." Her words stopped me cold. I blinked, confused. "Excuse me?" Her grin stretched wider. "Sorry, habit. I read people." The way she said it made the hair on my arms prickle. I nodded quickly and kept moving. But as the flight wore on, her strangeness became undeniable. She mirrored the man in 14D, copying each of his gestures seconds later. If he pulled at his sleeves, so did she. If he crossed his legs, she followed. Every subtle move replicated. At one point, I overheard her murmur to him, "Sleep is strange. You never know who might be watching as you drift away." He froze, gave her a forced smile, then shoved on his headphones. About an hour in, I was pushing the beverage cart with my coworker Marissa when turbulence shook the cabin. Nothing severe, just enough to rattle cups and make passengers grip their trays. I glanced back at 14C. She hadn't budged. Not a twitch, not even the faint jolt others experienced. Her frame sat stiff, hands still folded, eyes fixed forward, the same smile frozen in place. When our eyes met, she whispered words I can never erase. You shouldn't ignore me." A chill ran through me. I tore my gaze away, nudging the cart onward. The rest of the journey blurred in anxious haze. Passengers drifted into uneasy sleep, and Marissa and I whispered in the galley about how unsettling that woman was. By the time we landed in Vancouver after 1 a.m., people shuffled off groggy. I stood by the exit offering goodbyes, but when row 14 cleared, she was nowhere. Perhaps she slipped out quickly, I thought, yet I had no memory of her walking past. Later, when I checked the passenger manifest, my stomach dropped. Seat 14C was listed as vacant, but I had seen her, spoken to her, watched her sit there for hours. Our crew was shuttled to a nearby airport hotel, a modest chain. I told myself I must have misread the manifest, or perhaps she'd been reassigned at the last minute. Fatigue can warp perception. I checked into room 512 on the 5th floor and collapsed on the bed. I might have slept an hour when I awoke to suffocating pressure. My eyes flew open. She was straddling me. The same passenger, the same tightly wound bun, the same wax-like skin, the same grotesque grin stretched unnaturally wide. Her knees pressed into my ribs, holding me down. "You weren't supposed to ignore me," she hissed. Her breath burned against my cheek. I tried to scream, but she pressed a finger to my lips. With a giggle, she held up a bent metal hair clip. "I used this to get in." Terror fueled me. I shoved her with desperate strength, sending her tumbling to the floor. She emitted a guttural, animal-like sound before darting toward the door. I scrambled for the phone and called the front desk, my voice shaking as I reported someone had broken in. Security arrived, but she was gone. Only the bent clip remained on the carpet, and the latch clearly forced. CCTV confirmed she had followed me inside, and later fled out a rear exit. Police took my statement, pulled flight records, but nothing added up. According to their data, she had never existed. No boarding pass, no booking, no identification linked to that seat. They told me I was lucky, that she could have carried a knife, that she might have killed me. But they didn't understand. What she left me with was far worse. Since that night, I haven't slept through a single evening. I wake to phantom weight crushing my chest. I hear her whispering in the dark. "You weren't supposed to ignore me." And sometimes, crossing through busy terminals, I catch a glimpse of her pale face in the crowd, smiling that same terrible smile, always watching. My first real job shifted the way I understood the world. At 24, I became a flight attendant for Summit Airways, a modest but expanding airline based in Boulder, Colorado. Since my teenage years, I had dreamed of life in the skies. The idea of traveling, encountering strangers, and escaping the ordinary had always drawn me in. I grew up in a small town called Ridgeview, about an hour north of Boulder, where most people worked in farming, local shops, or small offices. But I wanted more. I wanted to go beyond the mountains that shaped my childhood. When I got the acceptance call from Summit after training, I cried in my old bedroom at my father's house. He hugged me, proud but cautious, reminding me that life in the skies could be unpredictable. My mother had passed away from breast cancer when I was 16, so it had been just me and my dad ever since. He was the steady type, always urging me to stay grounded no matter how much I spoke about the thrill of the unknown. My base was Boulder Regional Airport, and most of my assignments were short domestic routes. Boulder to Phoenix, Boulder to Dallas, Boulder to Salt Lake City, sometimes even Chicago. They weren't glamorous international flights, but I didn't care. I was flying, I was earning, and I had my own small apartment in Aurora near the airport. My early months blurred together in a rhythm of alarms, pressed uniforms, heavy luggage, and learning how to wear a smile even when exhausted. Passengers were unpredictable. Some were kind, others dismissive, and many so immersed in their headphones and laptops they barely seemed real. My favorite moments came when I could calm nervous flyers or joke with kids over snacks. I told myself I had been born for this work. Then I met him. On a quiet afternoon flight to Portland, I noticed a man in seat 8C. He looked mid-30s, with pale skin, dark-combed hair, and business-casual clothes. Nothing about him stood out except his eyes, which followed me with relentless steadiness. When I served him coffee, his fingers lingered slightly against mine, subtle but impossible not to notice. Though the flight ended uneventfully, each time I glanced down the aisle, he was already watching me. I dismissed it as part of the job, until 2 days later, when he reappeared on a flight to Phoenix. This time, when I brought his drink, he smiled and said, "Good to see you again." My smile was forced as I answered, "Welcome back, coffee again?" His approving tone made it feel like an inside joke. I reminded myself that frequent travelers were common in Boulder, yet a chill crept up inside me. Over the next 2 weeks, I saw him 4 more times, under different seats and rows, but always on my flights. His name, as I found on the manifest, was Evan Rowe. It felt as though an invisible thread connected us, one I could not escape. One evening after a late return, my phone buzzed with a new Instagram follow request. The account had no photo, just the name Rowe83. My heart dropped. I had never shared my full name publicly at work, which meant he had memorized my badge. I didn't accept or block it, just stared at it with unease. The first time fear truly sank in was during a Dallas layover. After checking into the crew hotel, I went out for a quick dinner at a taco shop. As I entered, scanning for a booth, I froze. Evan stood at the counter waiting for his order. His head turned slowly like he expected me. "Small world," he said casually, as though we were old friends. I asked what he was doing there, and his vague reply, "Work," unnerved me. When I told him I was with the crew, he studied me and said, "I figured you'd be around. You always seem to be." His words felt twisted, as if I were the one following him. I ordered quickly, skipped eating there, and took my food back. That night I locked my door twice and barely touched dinner. For a week, there was silence. No Evan, no strange accounts. I almost let myself relax until a Salt Lake City flight where he appeared again, this time in the front row near the galley. He leaned in as I checked belts and whispered, "You look tired." I could help with that. His tone wasn't openly threatening, but it felt like a violation. Throughout the short flight, his eyes stayed fixed on me. When passengers left, he delayed until last. Passing by, he leaned close enough for his breath to brush my ear. "I'll see you soon." My entire body chilled. That night, I broke down and called my supervisor, tears spilling as I explained his repeated appearances, the restaurant encounter, and the whisper. She listened calmly, but seriously, assuring me I had done the right thing. She promised to report it to security and adjusted my schedule. New routes, new times. For a while, it worked. My assignments shifted. My layovers changed, and I stopped seeing Evan. Slowly, I convinced myself it had been coincidence, bad luck, or obsession fading away. But then, one night after grocery shopping, I found a white envelope slid under my Aurora apartment door. Inside was a single sheet with typed words, "You shouldn't have told them." My hands shook as I realized he knew where I lived. I called the police immediately. Officers came, took the note, and reviewed the building's cameras. Days later, they told me nothing useful was caught. No face, no evidence. My apartment no longer felt safe. Every hallway sound echoed like footsteps, and I barely slept. I eventually called my dad in tears. He begged me to quit and come home, but I refused. This was my dream, my career, and I would not let Evan take it. Instead, I moved deeper into Boulder, into a complex with tighter security and cameras. My airline offered counseling and further changes to my schedule. Then silence. No more notes, no sightings, no whispers. Months passed and I let myself breathe again. I convinced myself he might have moved on or been scared away. But even now, 2 years later, I still feel unease in every airport crowd, afraid of seeing his face. I triple-check my locks each night and never post my location until after leaving. Because deep down, I know he's still somewhere out there, watching, waiting, and one day, he will board another flight. I never imagined I would be the type of person to share an experience like this. For most of my life, I've been the cautious kind, the sort who irons uniforms crisp, double-checks alarms, and never forgets to switch off the stove. My name is Rachel Turner, and I've been a flight attendant for nearly 11 years. People always assume the role is glamorous. Overnights in Rome, clinking champagne glasses, crews striding together through terminals like they belong in glossy magazines. The truth is, it's swollen feet, endless delays, passengers snapping at you, and the relentless drone of engines still echoing long after you've stepped off the plane. Even so, I loved it. At least I did until the night that altered everything. I was 24 when I applied to Northern Sky Airlines, a mid-tier carrier that ran mostly national flights but occasionally sent crews abroad. I still remember telling my dad, who frowned in that way only he could. "Rachel," he said, "so you're going to hand out peanuts at 30,000 feet? That's really what you want?" And I did. Not for the peanuts, but because growing up in Des Moines with a mother who stacked travel catalogs high and a brother who enlisted in the Air Force, planes felt like my rebellion and my freedom wrapped together. The thought of opening my eyes in Boston one morning and waking in Denver the next lit a fire in me. By the time I turned 30, I had worked hundreds of routes. I'd managed drunken passengers, mid-air medical chaos, turbulence that tossed people around. I thought I had seen it all. Then came Flight 812. It was February of 2019. A snowstorm had blanketed Chicago, leaving Midway Airport snarled in delays. Our crew had been switched onto a red-eye bound for Seattle, usually one of my favorite runs. The cabin team was me, Andrea, and a rookie named Miguel, eager and still green. Captain Robert Shaw had that firm, steady voice that put passengers at ease, and his first officer, Henry, spoke little but handled things well. The night began as usual. Andrea and I stood at the boarding door, greeting travelers with routine smiles. People shuffled past wrapped in scarves, clutching hot coffee, breath clouding from the lingering chill. At first it seemed like nothing unusual. Then she appeared. She looked in her early 30s, though perhaps younger, her long black hair damp as though she had stepped out of rain. Her complexion was pale, in a way that wasn't cosmetic. She carried no suitcase, no bag, only a thin leather clutch. She handed me her boarding slip in silence. "Good evening," I offered, hoping to catch her gaze. She didn't reply, just moved toward first class. Andrea whispered after checking the sheet, "Seat 2A." I nodded, thinking little of it. Some passengers are cold, some are timid, some simply want the trip to end. But something in her silence pressed on me. Once at cruising height, things eased. Lights dimmed, passengers leaned back. The familiar low hum took over. I worked coach service while Andrea handled first class, and Miguel was stuck gathering trash. When I finally crossed the curtain, I checked 2A. The woman sat upright, stiff, eyes fixed forward. Her seat wasn't reclined, her blanket remained folded, her hands pressed to the armrests, fingers coiled tight. "Would you care for a drink?" I asked gently. Her eyes shifted to me. Dark, so dark they barely caught light. "Water," she muttered, her voice low, unused. I set a glass before her. She never touched it. Later, when I came for empty cups, the water sat full. That was the first moment I felt the cold trace through me. 2 hours in, turbulence hit. Not violent, but enough to rattle trays and make passengers grip seats. Andrea and I strapped in at the galley jump seats. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw her. The woman in 2A was not buckled. She rose, deliberate, barefoot steps soundless on the carpet. "Miss," I called over the shakes, "please return to your seat." She ignored me, eyes locked on the cockpit door. Before I could unbuckle, Miguel appeared, blocking her. "You must sit now," he said firmly. She leaned close, lips brushing his ear. I couldn't hear the words, but I watched the blood drain from his face. He froze, then turned and bolted into the galley. I caught his arm, whispering, "What did she tell you?" He shook his head fiercely. "Nothing. I can't repeat it." He wouldn't step back into first class again that night. Half an hour later, Captain Shaw's voice came calm through the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, just a touch of turbulence, nothing serious. Please stay seated." Afterward, my interphone rang. It was Shaw. "Rachel, have you noticed anything out of the ordinary?" My stomach dropped. "Why?" I asked. "Because we just intercepted a signal." A woman's voice broke through on emergency frequency. She said a single word, "Run." I glanced toward 2A. She remained still, lips unmoving, water untouched. "Captain," I whispered, "I think it came from inside." Silence. Then, "Stay sharp. Lock the galley carts before the cockpit. Do not let anyone approach." Time dragged painfully. People slept. The shaking stopped. But 2A never shifted, never blinked much at all. That haunted me. She hardly blinked. Near 4 in the morning, before descent, Andrea returned pale. She spoke. She whispered. "What did she say?" I asked. Andrea shook her head. "Not to me. To the man across the aisle." She leaned in, whispered, and 10 seconds later he rang his call button, begging to get off immediately. "We were 30,000 feet in the air." I asked, "What did you tell him?" She swallowed. "That he had to wait." But Rachel, his face, he looked like he'd met death. I peeked through the curtain. The man in 3C sat rigid, drenched in sweat, hands gripping the seat so tightly they whitened. And in 2A, for the first time, she smiled. We descended over Seattle under a sky still cloaked in darkness. The city lights sparkled below, but I could hardly glance at them. My gaze never left 2A. She sat motionless, no luggage, no sip of water. After landing, passengers stretched and gathered their things, but she remained. "Miss," I said softly, standing near her, "we've arrived. You need to disembark." Slowly, she turned, eyes unblinking, locking onto mine. She leaned close, her breath icy against my cheek. "Come down to the field," she whispered. I froze, every instinct screaming to flee. Andrea touched my arm behind me. "Rachel, "Who are you talking to?" I spun around to gesture, but the seat was empty. Security swept the aircraft. Nothing. No record of her boarding slip. In fact, 2A was unassigned. Miguel refused to fly again for a month. The passenger in 3C filed a complaint that something inhuman had been on board, though corporate hushed it quickly. I tried to sleep in my hotel afterward, but her words followed me. "Come down to the field." Even now, years later, I jolt awake at night, certain I'll see her standing barefoot at the foot of my bed, her dress shifting as though unseen turbulence still carried her forward. I keep flying. What else can I do? This job is my life. Yet each time I scan the cabin and glimpse seat 2A, I feel my throat tighten. And every winter, as storms shake planes across the skies, I wonder if she's still out there, whispering to another unfortunate soul, beckoning them down into whatever endless field waits beneath the clouds. I'm Ava Reynolds, and I've served as a flight attendant for North Star Airlines for almost 9 years now. People imagine our life is glossy, crossing time zones, brushing shoulders with the wealthy, donning pressed uniforms that could belong in an advertisement. The reality is grittier: long hours, chronic jet lag, and passengers who believe their fare entitles them to be rude. Yet there's also an element of endurance, quietly handling in-flight crises, calming disputes, and noticing subtle signs when someone's health is about to falter. I took to flying because I wanted to get away. My parents split when I was 17, and the home I grew up in near Duluth became a war zone. By 21, I needed a reason to leave. Flying provided that reason. Constant motion, no roots. But 9 years on, I've learned that escaping doesn't equal freedom. Often the thing you see as your release becomes the cage you never leave. This incident began on flight NS-207, a 14-hour red-eye from New York to Dubai last November. It was the kind of route that draws diplomats, oil magnates, celebrities, and people whose wealth gives them a false sense of immunity. I was assigned to first class that night, a row of 12 private suites with sliding doors, each one worth more than many people earn in a month. Our crew gathered for a briefing at 6:30 p.m. sharp. Our chief purser, Marta, scanned the manifest and flagged VIPs. "We've got Senator Whitmore in 2C, she said, and a Qatari executive in 1A who always travels with an assistant. Be discreet, no selfies, no idle chatter. Remember, our first-class guests are frequent flyers. They'll notice if we slip up." I nodded, tucking a loose hair into my bun. It felt like any other night, or so I believed. Boarding opened at 7:15, and the standard procession of suits, stilettos, and high-end luggage shuffled through. Then he showed up. Seat 3A. The passenger name read Mr. Jonathan Hale. He appeared to be in his mid-50s, tall, impeccably dressed in a tailored slate suit and cufflinks that flashed in the cabin lights. His arrival was understated yet authoritative, the kind of person who enters a room and commands attention without raising his voice. "Good evening, Mr. Hale," I said with the practiced affability we use. He inclined his head. His voice was low. "Thank you, Ava." For a beat, I froze. He'd used my first name without looking at my name badge. I told myself it was coincidence, that someone nearby might have used my name, but the way he said it, as though waiting for that precise moment, sent a shiver through me. The initial hours passed without incident. Dinner service proceeded as usual. Champagne flowed and trays were removed. I checked on Hale a few times. He answered curtly, but his pale blue eyes lingered on me, a fraction longer than was comfortable. Around midnight, the service light above 3A blinked. I moved down the aisle, slid his suite's door open, and greeted him. He sat upright, his laptop shut, and a leather-bound notebook beside him. "Could I trouble you for a whiskey?" he asked, his calm tone leaving no room for hesitation. "Of course. Any preference?" I asked. "Macallan, 18, if available," I returned moments later with the glass. As I set it down, I noticed his notebook was open. For an instant, I glimpsed what looked like a printed photograph affixed to the page, my photograph. Not one from that flight, but taken from my employee ID. Below it were several handwritten notes. I swallowed hard and forced a steady voice. "Anything else I can bring you?" "No," he replied, finally looking up. "That will be all, Ava." He closed the notebook without checking my badge. I stepped back toward the galley with my heart racing. I told myself I must have been mistaken, a reflection, a trick of cabin light, but something inside told me I had seen exactly what was there. About an hour later, I found Kevin, one of the business class attendants, in the rear galley speaking in hushed tones. When I entered, he nearly jumped. Mr. Hale stood beside him, leaning on the counter and nursing his whiskey. Their conversation stopped on my arrival. "Everything all right?" I asked. Kevin gave an awkward smile. Yeah, Mr. Hale was asking about our typical routes, how long we've been flying. Hale's lips pulled into a faint smile. I'm working on a book about aviation, he said, eyes never straying from me. I find people compelling. I nodded politely and made my exit, an uneasy knot settling in my gut. By the 9th hour, the flight had become a blur of dimmed lights and sleeping passengers. I moved quietly through the aisles on routine checks. When I strolled past 3A, the suite door was slightly ajar. He was awake, flipping through that same notebook, and there it was again. My image beneath the reading lamp, unmistakable. At that point, any doubt evaporated. I returned to the galley, pale and shaken. Marta noticed immediately. You look off. Everything all right? She asked. I lowered my voice. I think a passenger has personal information about me, I admitted. She frowned and cautioned me not to jump to conclusions. Some of these folks hire investigators. They run checks on people they interact with. Probably nothing, she said, though even she agreed it didn't feel inconsequential. Before landing, I watched Hale methodically gather his belongings. He slid the notebook into a leather folder, sealed it in a briefcase, and secured the case with a digital lock. His movements were deliberate, almost ritualized. On arrival, he was one of the first to stand. As he passed me in the aisle, he paused, took my hand and said, "It was a pleasure meeting you, Ava," his grip firm, his hand unnaturally cold. "I hope to see you again soon." I managed a mechanical smile until he was gone, heart pounding so violently I feared fainting. 2 weeks after that flight, during our pre-flight briefing, security circulated a memo. It contained photos of individuals being investigated for inappropriate interactions with crew. My stomach lurched when I recognized his face, though the memo declared that his identity was in doubt. The document suggested he might be involved in unauthorized intelligence gathering, covert profiling of airline personnel, collecting personal data, and probing security weak points. Several attendants had reported similar incidents, unsettling encounters, photos of crew members, a sense of being watched. I assumed that would be the end of it. Yet 2 months later, on a red-eye to Amsterdam, I froze as I stepped into first class. Seat 3A was occupied. He was there again, smiling, his name absent from the manifest. "Good evening, Ava," he said with a silken voice. That night he behaved outwardly. He barely called for service, but I could feel his attention on me the entire flight, like a pressure on my skin. When the plane landed, airport security boarded before passengers disembarked and walked straight to 3A. I never saw him again after that, but I am not the same. Now whenever I enter the cabin at night, I scan faces twice. I watch anyone who seems to know too much or who studies crew members too intently. The irony is that observing passengers has always been part of our job, but I never expected to be its subject. When the cabin lights go down and I sense eyes lingering on me in the dark, I wonder if it's him, if he's still out there watching. I never imagined that my career would leave a mark I could never shake off, something that would keep me restless in anonymous hotel rooms at 3 in the morning, lying awake, listening to phantom echoes from 35,000 feet above the world. My name is Rachel Morgan, and I've worked as a flight attendant for Meridian Skies Airlines for 11 years. Most of my assignments are international, San Francisco to Seoul, Hong Kong, and occasionally Melbourne. When people picture flight attendants, they imagine polished smiles, drink carts, and glamorous travel ads. The truth is far more demanding. We're trained for every scenario: medical crises, fires, sudden decompressions, even hijackings. We're protectors of 300 lives sealed inside a metal cylinder 7 miles over endless ocean. Yet no drill or handbook could have prepared me for what unfolded on flight MS-417 last October. It began like any other long overnight journey from San Francisco to Kyoto, 14 hours of Pacific sky ahead. Every seat was booked, 348 passengers, families eager for autumn festivals, students flying back home, and professionals absorbed in glowing screens. I had just turned 34 that week, and usually I appreciated these marathon flights. They had a rhythm I found soothing. The chaos of boarding, meal trays rattling through aisles, cabin lights dimming, then the hush of travelers sinking into sleep. But that night, almost from the moment boarding began, something felt off. "Welcome aboard," I greeted automatically as passengers shuffled past with pillows and bags. My coworker Lila murmured beside me, "Long one tonight. Let's hope for calm skies." We shared tired smiles. Flight attendants rely on hope. Hope for stable weather. Hope for peaceful passengers. Hope that nothing goes terribly wrong. Halfway through boarding, a man drew my attention. Mid-30s, pale, slender, a dark jacket clinging to him like protection. He hesitated at the door, eyes flicking from face to face as if memorizing everyone. When he finally extended his boarding pass, I noticed his hand quiver faintly. "Seat 37C, I read aloud, directing him down the aisle. He gave a quick nod, saying nothing, and slipped inside. His silence unsettled me for a moment, though I brushed it aside. We see all sorts of travelers. By 1:30 a.m. cabin time, most were asleep, the steady drone of engines and the flicker of screens filling the dimness. I moved carefully with my flashlight, checking belts and looking for anyone unwell. That's when I noticed him again. Seat 37C. He sat bolt upright, fists tight on the armrests, eyes locked on the blank seatback screen. His breathing was shallow, and sweat dampened his collar despite the cool air. I crouched close. "Sir, are you feeling all right? Can I get you something?" His head turned slowly. His eyes were wide, pupils blown in the faint light. "They know I'm here," he whispered hoarsely. "Don't act like you're talking to me. They're watching." My training steadied me. Perhaps paranoia, anxiety, or a reaction to medication. I kept my tone even. "Who's watching you?" His hand suddenly clamped around my wrist, startling me. "You don't understand," he rasped. "They drugged me before I boarded. They're testing it. Don't drink the water. Don't eat the food. It's poisoned." I spoke firmly, though gently. "Sir, please release my hand." Slowly, shame shadowed his face, as his grip eased. Then he muttered, "I wasn't meant to see the files, only numbers, but I saw names. Arms deals, transfers, billions. They can't allow me to land." My stomach nodded. This wasn't just fear of flying. "Why don't you step with me to the galley?" I suggested quietly. "We can speak more privately there." To my surprise, he agreed. In the rear galley, far from curious stares, his agitation grew worse. He pressed himself against the counter, trembling. "I'm Daniel Reed," he blurted. "I'm an accountant. Last week in Jakarta, I was reviewing defense contracts. I accessed servers I shouldn't have. I found transfers tied to governments and groups that should never have weapons like these. Now they're after me. They'll kill anyone to silence me." I traded a quick look with Lila, who had joined us. Her raised brows suggested she thought it was a psychotic break. But something in his eyes unsettled me. His fear was too raw, too consuming. When I quietly reached for the interphone to contact the purser, Daniel stiffened. "No," he hissed. "Don't call anyone. They'll know." I kept my voice steady. "Daniel, you're safe. No one here intends to harm you." He shook his head violently. "You don't get it. They're already here. Some of your crew aren't who you think." His gaze darted toward Leela. She flushed with anger but stayed silent. I discreetly signaled anyway, and minutes later our onboard air marshal arrived. Broad-shouldered, calm, his name was David Cole. "Daniel, I'm David," he said with steady authority. "I'm here to help. Let's sit down." Daniel recoiled, eyes narrowing. "You're one of them, aren't you? I see your badge. You think I don't know?" His voice grew louder, stirring passengers nearby. Then suddenly, he lunged at the galley cart, seizing a metal coffee pot. "Stay back," he shouted, voice cracking. "If I don't reach Kyoto, they'll erase us all." Passengers stirred in fear. "Put it down," David commanded firmly. But Daniel's eyes blazed. He yanked a black rectangular object from his pocket. In the shadows, it looked like a gun. Several passengers screamed. In an instant, David tackled him. The object slid across the floor. It was only a portable charger. With help from 2 passengers, Daniel was restrained, wrists tied with zip cuffs. Tears streaked his face. "You don't understand," he sobbed. "If I vanish, everything I said is true." For the next 10 hours, he remained sedated under a doctor's watch. He muttered incoherently at times, eyes rolling back, then fell into uneasy silence. When we landed at Kansai International, Japanese officials boarded immediately and escorted him away. Relief swept the cabin. Just another unruly traveler, we told ourselves. Paperwork, reports, and we'd move on. But I couldn't forget. 3 days later, still in Kyoto on layover, my supervisor called. "Rachel, some officials want to debrief you about MS-417. Expecting routine follow-up, I entered the hotel conference room where 2 men in dark suits waited. No badges, no names. They asked me to repeat Daniel's words exactly. When I asked why, one smiled thinly. "Standard intelligence procedure. He's had prior psychiatric problems. Nothing to worry about." Yet the other scribbled notes furiously, barely glancing up. "Is what he claimed true?" I pressed cautiously. "About the files, The weapons? Silence. Finally, one man stood. "Thank you for your time, Miss Morgan. That'll be all." I left with my pulse racing. Back in San Francisco, life carried on. Briefings, flights, hotels. But Daniel's face haunted me. His voice clung to memory. One night at home, an email appeared in my inbox. The sender was unfamiliar. Subject MS-417. The message said only, "They were listening. Be careful." I froze, breath caught, and deleted it instantly. Changed my email address. Told myself it was just him. Until a month later, during boarding on another Seoul route, I glimpsed a headline on a passenger's phone. "American accountant found dead in Jakarta. Apparent suicide." The photo beneath was Daniel Reed. My stomach dropped. I tried to reason it away. A troubled man lost in paranoia. Nothing more. But on long-haul flights, when the cabin is hushed and hundreds sleep under my care, I find myself studying them differently, wondering what secrets they hide, wondering who is truly watching who, and sometimes in the quiet galley, with engines droning endlessly, I swear I still hear his whisper, "They can't let me land." I've been working as a flight attendant for nearly 12 years, though at times I question whether I chose the profession, or if it somehow chose me. My name is Elena Moore, and for most of my adult life, airplane aisles have been more familiar than the streets around my own home. Outsiders picture our careers as glamorous, always hopping between cities, sipping champagne on long layovers in tropical hotels, living like characters out of some film. But the reality is far less dazzling. It's long hours, constant fatigue, missed birthdays, and endless holidays spent in transit. It's handling passengers who bark orders as though you're their servant, or others who grip your arm during turbulence, convinced you're their only anchor to safety. Still, I always thought the sky was where I was meant to be. That certainty ended last month. On the morning of April 12th, my day started like any other. I woke at 4:10 a.m. in my small Coral Gables apartment, as I always do, before the alarm ever had the chance to ring. Years of early shifts have trained me that way. My suitcase was packed the night before. I never leave that task for mornings. After a quick shower, my uniform pressed and waiting slid on easily. My hair was pulled taut, red lipstick set perfectly, and the ritual coffee followed. I sipped it by the kitchen window in silence, while sodium lamps glowed across slick pavement outside. At 5:05, I was already on the road heading toward Miami International. I arrived with time to spare for the 5:45 briefing as protocol requires. Our assignment was Flight GA-217 to Kingston, Jamaica, a short run just under 2 hours. Captain Richard Hemsley would lead, a man I had flown with before, calm and reassuring, the type of voice that could relax even the most frightened passenger. His first officer, Miguel Alvarez, was younger, brimming with the kind of eager energy that hadn't yet faded. My fellow attendants were Hannah Kim, my closest friend on the crew, and Marcus Grant, a quiet veteran with 20 years under his belt. Hemsley's briefing was straightforward. Weather clear, smooth skies, maybe a touch of light turbulence off the Florida coast, nothing serious. "Short hop," he said. "Let's keep it easy." We nodded, made our notes, shared half jokes. Hannah elbowed me with a grin, whispering, "Bet they're all spring breakers." I smirked back, better than toddlers crying the whole flight. Boarding began at 6:20. 96 passengers filled the Boeing 737 families chasing vacations, students in sandals. A couple of businessmen already pounding away at keyboards before we left the gate. I walked the aisles, steadying a grandmother's bag, reassuring a frazzled young mother with a baby, smiling at a nervous teenager clutching the armrest too tightly. Those fleeting moments, small as they are, often remind me why I keep doing this. At 6:47, we pushed back, right on schedule. The engines hummed beneath us, their vibration a strangely comforting heartbeat. I took my jump seat, watching the runway lights blur as we lifted into the pale sky. At cruising altitude, I started beverage service, something I've always found oddly grounding. It's when passengers reveal their most human selves. Some crack jokes, others quietly take a tiny cup of ginger ale like it's the only constant in an unpredictable world. But at 7:25 I felt it. Something wrong. Not turbulence, not violent, just an unsettling jolt as though unseen hands had lifted and let us fall. I froze mid-pour, soda spilling across my hand. A man in glasses glanced up, asking if everything was fine. I forced a smile, just a little air current. Across the aisle, Hannah's grip on the service cart betrayed the truth. She felt it too. Then, at 7:32, the seatbelt sign chimed without warning. Immediately, the interphone rang. I answered. "Elena." Captain Hemsley's voice was taut, stripped of his usual calm. "All crew, sit down. Now." The tone cut through me like ice. I buckled into my jump seat, Hannah and Marcus already secured. Passengers glanced around nervously as the plane shuddered again, the engine's pitch dipping strangely as if faltering mid-breath. And then it came. A plunge, not turbulence. A full drop that tore screams from every mouth. I was yanked upward, held only by my belt. Drinks and trays became weapons. A child's toy airplane smacked the ceiling before tumbling 2 rows ahead. 3 seconds of free fall, long enough to etch itself into memory. When we leveled, panic bloomed. Children cried, adults shouted. One woman hyperventilated into a bag. An older man in row 9 sat stiff, lips pale, eyes wild as though he'd glimpsed something invisible. Then the captain's voice filled the cabin, trying and failing to steady itself. "Ladies and gentlemen, we encountered a sudden air pocket. We lost a bit of altitude, but everything's under control. Please remain seated with belts fastened." A bit. That was not a bit. When the sign clicked off, I rushed to aid passengers. A little girl bled from her forehead. A businessman clutched his shoulder after his laptop slammed into him. We passed tissues, water, reassurances. Yet when I glanced forward, I caught sight of the cockpit door cracked open. Hemsley and Alvarez leaned over instruments, pale, whispering in low urgency, hands darting across panels. Hemsley suddenly looked back, catching my stare. In a flash, the door closed. The rest of the flight dragged in unnatural silence. No chatter, no laughter, only sniffles and the hum of engines. We touched down in Kingston at 8:58, nearly on time. Passengers disembarked shakily. Some muttered prayers, others glared with unspoken demands for answers. During the final cabin check, Hannah stooped near the rear exit and lifted a small black recorder, the kind pilots often carry for personal logs. "Whose you think this is?" she whispered. My throat caught. Probably the captain's. I'll return it. But I didn't. That night, while Hannah and Marcus went out for dinner, I sat in my hotel room, staring at it in my palm. Curiosity or fear, I pressed play. Hemsley's voice filled the room, calm yet strained. Personal log. Flight GA-217, April 12th. Something occurred today I can't explain. Instruments recorded a drop of 620 feet in 3 seconds. Weather showed nothing. No turbulence, no drafts. Air traffic reported no anomalies. It felt external, as if something forced us down. His voice dipped. For half a second before the plunge, every instrument went dark. The cockpit blacked out. No power, no data, nothing. Then instantly, everything returned. In 32 years flying, I've never seen this. It wasn't natural. The click of the recorder's end echoed in the silence. I sat stunned, my reflection in the mirror pale and strange. The next morning, I slipped the recorder into an envelope and left it at the front desk with his name. I told no one. Since then, whenever I'm strapped into a jump seat crossing open water, I can't stop replaying it. The plunge, the engines, eerie stutter, the sense that something unseen had seized us and let go only by choice. I keep insisting it was weather, a pocket of air, nothing more. But alone in the dark before another pre-dawn shift, I wonder if the skies conceal forces we were never meant to comprehend, and whether next time, mercy won't be offered. I chose life in the skies because I longed to run away. Growing up in Sheffield, I always felt cornered by routine. My parents were ordinary people with practical jobs. My mother worked in a small clinic. My father repaired furnaces. Their expectations for me were simple: pursue something sensible like nursing or teaching. But I ached for distance, for endless horizons, and for the fleeting company of strangers. I wanted glimpses of the world, even if only through hurried layovers or stolen mornings in unfamiliar cities. At 23, I applied to a large British airline. To my disbelief and everyone else's, I was hired. The training tested us beyond limits. Fire drills, emergency medical care, learning to plaster a smile even when shoes crushed our toes. But the first time I fastened that navy uniform with sharp lines, I felt like a different woman, someone bold. 3 years later, the boldness had drained from me. The work stripped me thin. Exhausting long hauls, sleepless jet lag, drunken passengers, turbulence both inside and out. Yet the night routes held a strange allure. Red eyes were hushed. Most passengers only wanted warmth, darkness and quiet. I liked the soft glow of reading lamps, the steady drone of engines like a colossal pulse. But one of those flights unraveled everything. It was November, bitter and raw. Flight 828 from Heathrow to Boston was on my schedule. That evening I glanced at the departure board. Delays across the Atlantic, except ours, still marked on time. The crew was small. Daniel, our purser, mid-40s, disciplined but decent. Chloe, my closest companion, golden-haired, playful, just 25. Priya, a new trainee, hesitant but eager. And Captain Richard Hale, a man with decades of calm confidence behind the controls. Boarding started after 11. Travelers shuffled in, hauling bags, half asleep already. Families, business people, students. Then came him. He was tall, maybe in his early 30s, wearing a long black coat though the cabin was warm. His walk was slow, his gaze scanning each row as if searching. When he reached me at the door, I smiled and greeted him. He did not reply. His eyes, a pale slate gray, lingered on me a fraction too long before he turned down the aisle in silence. His assigned seat was 19A by the window mid-cabin. I remembered because he sat stiffly, palms flat on his thighs, staring out at runway lights. He never adjusted his belt, never touched his phone, never moved, just sat there. Something about him unsettled me, but I dismissed it. We encounter all kinds. The plane lifted past midnight. Service was uneventful. Most wanted blankets and rest, skipping meals. By 2:30 a.m., the cabin was dark, calm, engines thrumming, the occasional cough breaking the stillness. As I walked through checking belts and trays, I reached 19A and froze. He wasn't asleep, he was moving. Not casually, not like someone shifting for comfort. His head tilted back against the seat while his body swayed from side to side, as if following music no one else could hear. His hands twitched on his thighs in peculiar rhythmic motions. "Sir," I whispered. No response. His eyes half open, fixed somewhere far beyond the ceiling. I glanced around. Everyone else was sleeping. "Sir, are you okay?" He slowly turned his head. His gray eyes met mine, his lips parted. "You've got beautiful eyes." His tone was flat, hollow. Not admiration but observation. A chill swept over me. I managed a polite reply and urged him to rest, retreating quickly. In the galley I told Chloe. She gave a nervous laugh. "Airplane creeps. Ignore him." But I couldn't shake the emptiness in his voice. At 4 a.m., turbulence rattled the cabin. The belt lights blinked. Passengers stirred awake. I rushed through, ensuring everyone buckled up. When I reached row 19, I froze again. The seat was empty. No blanket, no trace. Daniel came up behind me. "Problem?" he asked. "There was someone here," I whispered. "Tall, black coat, seat 19A. He frowned, checked his manifest. "That seat isn't booked. It's one of the few empty ones tonight." I could barely breathe. "No, he was here." I spoke to him. Daniel gave me a steady look. "You're overtired, Alicia. Get some coffee." But I knew. Half an hour later, walking past again, I saw him, seated calmly, as if he'd never vanished. My legs buckled. I nearly collided with Priya. "Are you okay?" she whispered. I pointed, but when she looked, the seat was vacant again. Her brow furrowed. "It's just a seat, Alicia." For the next hour I avoided that row, keeping busy with water rounds, tending to a sick child, anything to distract myself. But inevitably, I passed again, and there he was. This time, he turned before I could speak. "You changed my seat," he said softly. My breath caught. "Excuse me?" "You moved me. I was at the door first, then beside the woman. Now here. You keep moving me." I shook my head. "Sir, you must be mistaken. Please stay seated with your belt fastened." He leaned closer, his voice sinking into a whisper that froze me. "You'll make a beautiful corpse." I staggered back, pulse racing. In an instant, the seat was empty. As we prepared to descend into Boston, I trembled. My colleagues noticed. Chloe joked uneasily. Priya's face was lined with worry. Daniel sternly told me to keep it together. During my final walkthrough, passengers were drowsy but gathering belongings, the usual end-of-flight scene, until I reached the back. There he stood, coat draped loosely, arms swaying in that strange rhythm, head rolling side to side, gray eyes burning into me. I froze, but no one else seemed to notice. He stepped closer, breath chilling against my ear. Ambassador of death. And then he was gone. We landed without incident. Sunlight spilled into the cabin, golden and steady. Passengers filed out laughing, yawning, normal. But row 19 remained untouched, belt perfectly laid, cushion smooth. Daniel placed a hand on my shoulder. "Rest, Alicia. It's been a long week." But I knew the truth. I had seen him. Even now, months later, his gray eyes return in reflections. His voice repeats in my head. I live marked by that night. I never flew again. When people ask why I left the skies, I tell them I wanted an ordinary life. The real answer is simpler. I am afraid. Afraid that someday, on another red eye, I'll look down the cabin and row 19 will not be empty. And next time, he won't just whisper. I never expected the job to make me more wary of people than of slicing through a storm at 35,000 feet. For almost 8 years, I'd worked as a cabin crew member, and I'd encountered my share of oddities. Intoxicated travelers, sudden medical crises, and turbulence so fierce it made hands clamp down on armrests until the knuckles whitened. Yet none of those moments lodged with me the way one particular journey did, 2 years back. At the time, I was employed by a European carrier for anonymity. I'll rename it Airline Airways. I had structured my life around this work. The liberty of constant travel, friendships with colleagues, and the small repeated pleasure of dragging my suitcase across polished terminal floors in a new city every week were everything to me. But that life carried loneliness too. I was 28, single, mostly living out of hotels. My parents, who lived in Chicago, fretted often. I reassured them I was managing. That winter I was rostered for a long sector, Berlin to Abu Dhabi, continuing onward to Singapore. The Berlin-Abu Dhabi sector was overnight. Red eyes are always the hardest, passengers irritable, infants unable to settle, and crew surviving on too much caffeine. I was used to that routine. What I couldn't account for was the heavy unease that hit the moment I stepped aboard that specific aircraft. The gate area had been oddly bare. Late-night departures usually buzzed with noise, but this one felt hushed, like the air itself held its breath. Fellow crew members seemed on edge. "Big shift tonight," muttered Maya, another attendant, as she fussed with her scarf. She's normally upbeat, but she looked washed out. "Yeah," I answered, hoping dull engines and sleep would carry everyone through. When boarding began, one passenger immediately felt wrong. He was tall and thin, moving with an awkward stiffness that made his limbs look misaligned. His clothing hung loose and his eyes looked hollow. He carried nothing. No hand luggage, no coat, not even a phone, only a boarding pass. I greeted him and gestured toward his seat. "Good evening. 18A is down this way." He gave no reply. He fixed me with a half smile that didn't reach his eyes, then wordlessly passed by and took his place. A prickling crawled across my skin. I tried to dismiss it. People come in all kinds, but the way he kept glancing at me unnerved me more than I cared to admit. Hours later, the cabin lights were low and most people had fallen asleep beneath blankets. The engine drone filled the quiet. I was moving down the aisle carrying a tray of water for anyone still awake. When I reached row 18, a wave of pressure hit me. The man sat upright, fully alert, staring straight forward. He hadn't touched the meal service and had not moved. "Would you like some water?" I asked softly, keeping my tone professional. He turned his head toward me with a slow, deliberate motion. His smile broadened, revealing teeth that looked oddly uneven, almost filed. "I don't drink water," he said, his voice low and almost guttural. I paused, nodded, and kept walking, though my stomach rolled. The words themselves were ordinary, but the cadence and the way he spoke felt like derision directed at me. Back in the galley, Maya raised an eyebrow. "You all right? You look like you saw something." I whispered. "Row 18. That man? He's weird. Gives me the creeps." She peered down the aisle and shivered. "Yeah, I get it. Don't let him rattle you." But he did rattle me. Each time I passed, even without looking, I sensed him watching. While checking a passenger's belt, I glanced sideways and caught him staring straight at me, unblinking and smiling. Some 3 hours into the flight, turbulence hit. Seatbelt signs flashed. The crew did what we could to secure ourselves and reassure passengers. I strapped into a jump seat near row 18 and noticed something that froze me. He wasn't buckled. He stood, steady in the shaking cabin, and walked slowly down the aisle toward me. "Sir," I called above the rattling, firm and loud, "you must return to your seat immediately." He halted in front of me, leaning so close I could practically feel his breath. There was a foul odor, a stench like decaying meat. "Why don't you sit with me instead?" he whispered. My pulse jumped. I unlatched and rose, planting myself between him and the rest of the plane. "Sir, you need to go back to your seat now." Other passengers were watching. The tension was electric. For a frightening instant, I braced for an attack. Instead, he burst into a hollow, chilling laugh and slithered back to his row. My hands trembled. Once the turbulence eased, Maya hurried over. "What happened?" she asked. My voice shook as I explained, and her eyes widened. "We should tell the captain." "We have." The captain had already radioed ahead to request security on arrival in Abu Dhabi. Still, there remained several hours before touchdown. As the hours wore on, the passenger's behavior became increasingly odd. He muttered to himself, swayed and shredded at his arms until blood showed. Nearby travelers whispered and a few summoned crew in worry. "Do you think he's dangerous?" a woman asked, hushed. I forced a smile. "Everything's under control, ma'am." But inside, I knew nothing felt secure. Once, while bending to pick up rubbish, I heard him murmur so faintly I thought I'd imagined it. "You won't make it back home." I froze. My throat tightened. I asked him to repeat himself. He only smiled again, his eyes catching the dim cabin light. When we finally landed, a sense of relief swept through the crew. Security personnel boarded and surrounded the area where he'd been sitting. Then the strangest thing, the seat was empty. There was no sign of him leaving. No one had seen him step off. His boarding pass showed he'd checked in at departure, yet there was no record of anyone matching his details at arrival. The manifest listed a name, but when cross-checked, nothing matched any passport. Maya and I stood looking at the vacant seat, chilled. The captain offered a practical explanation. Records sometimes malfunction. Maybe he slipped away before security reached him. But I couldn't accept that. I had looked into those eyes. I had smelled that breath. I had heard that whisper. For days I replayed every scene. The image of the empty seat and his mocking grin haunted me. Friends suggested perhaps he was simply an unstable passenger who had somehow left unnoticed. But a part of me believed he was never meant to be there in the first place. Even now, 2 years on, when I walk down a dim aisle at night, I feel as though someone watches me. On rough flights, when turbulence rattles the cabin, I sometimes swear I hear that same rasp whisper close to my ear. "You won't make it back home." I never imagined the career I once thought was a dream would nearly unravel my sanity and almost cost another woman her child. My name is Amelia Grant. I'm 32 years old and have been flying as a cabin attendant with Atlantic Skies Airlines for just over 7 years. When most people hear that, they picture glamour, exotic destinations, champagne lounges, and pressed uniforms with painted smiles. The reality is far from the glossy brochures. It's endless fatigue, swollen ankles, recycled air, turbulence, and the constant act of appearing calm even when your pulse is racing. I never entered this field for the luxury. I entered out of necessity. After graduation, I was drowning in student loans, juggling 2 part-time jobs that barely covered rent in Phoenix. My father died suddenly of a heart attack when I was 24, and my mother's medical bills began stacking higher than I could manage. A college friend mentioned airlines were hiring rapidly, promising reliable pay and benefits. I applied, telling myself it would be short-term. 7 years later, I'm still flying, still waiting for temporary to end. But last week, on a flight from Delhi to Sydney, something happened that clings to me even now. A reminder of how fragile trust becomes at 30,000 feet above the ground. I was part of a 4-person crew on Flight 217, a long haul with a stop in Kuala Lumpur. Morning flights are notoriously chaotic. Passengers half awake, families struggling with strollers, business travelers glued to their screens. The airport was a storm of bodies that morning, one of the busiest I'd ever seen. Crowds shoved through security, announcements roared, suitcase wheels rattled against polished floors. Sweat was already building under my navy jacket as I adjusted my scarf and dragged my roller bag across the terminal. Our lead attendant, Clara, a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s with sleek ironed hair, waved when she spotted me. "Amelia, there you are, ready for a long one." "As ready as I'll ever be," I muttered, forcing a smile. She smirked knowingly. "Coffee's in the galley. Grab some before we board." I nodded and headed toward the gate. That's when I saw her. She sat near the windows alone, wearing an ivory pantsuit that screamed privilege. A pearl necklace, oversized sunglasses, and hair knotted neatly in a bun. But it wasn't her wardrobe that caught me. It was her gaze. She wasn't watching me or the departure screens. She was staring at a woman wrestling with a stroller. The mother looked exhausted, probably mid-30s, hair wild from humidity, dressed in a simple t-shirt and joggers. Her little girl, maybe 2, with soft curls and wide brown eyes, clutched a stuffed rabbit as she dozed. The woman in pearls studied the child's face as if she was memorizing it. A shiver crawled across my back. Maybe it was harmless. I'd seen strangers dote on babies countless times, but her stillness, her calculating calm, unsettled me. "Amelia," Clara called, snapping me out of it. I turned and returned to the gate, forcing myself to let it go. Takeoff went smoothly. We moved through the cabin with rehearsed precision, stowing luggage, fastening belts, demonstrating oxygen masks. I tried to focus, but my eyes kept drifting to her seat 14A, and a few rows back, the young mother with her child curled in her lap. During drink service, I paused at 14A. "Good morning, ma'am. Anything to drink?" She lowered her glasses, revealing icy blue eyes. "Sparkling water, room temperature." "Of course." I smiled, but inside unease swirled. Those eyes weren't warm, they were measuring. When I handed her the bottle, she didn't thank me. She glanced past me, straight at the toddler squirming in her mother's arms 2 rows down. Mid-flight, the seatbelt sign switched off. Passengers moved toward the restrooms. I was collecting trays when the mother approached. Stroller folded, baby shifting in her arms. "Could you watch this for a moment?" she asked softly. "I need to take her to the restroom." I nodded. "Of course, take your time." She disappeared inside, child balanced on her hip. I set the stroller neatly against the wall. From the corner of my eye, I caught movement. 14A rose smoothly, moving down the aisle with deliberate ease, eyes fixed on the stroller. I stepped forward quickly. "Ma'am, can I help you with something?" Her expression was neutral. "Oh," she said lightly. "I thought this was blocking the aisle. Just wanted to move it." Her hand lingered on the stroller's handle longer than it should. "That's all right," I replied firmly, sliding it closer to me. "I've got it handled." A faint smile tugged at her lips, but her eyes stayed locked on mine. Something was wrong. Moments later, the mother reappeared with her fussy toddler, and I returned the stroller with a polite nod. As the woman buckled her daughter in, a smooth voice chimed in. "She's such a beautiful child." The woman from 14A stood nearby, leaning casually against a seat. The mother looked up, wary. Thank you." "How old is she?" the woman pressed. 2, the mother answered shortly, adjusting the blanket. "Lovely age," the woman said, tone lingering. "They're so impressionable." I stepped closer, my professional smile fixed. "Ma'am, please return to your seat while the aisle is occupied." Sunglasses back in place, she gave a faint nod and drifted back to 14A. But her focus had not shifted. Hours later, during descent into Kuala Lumpur, chaos erupted. The toddler began crying in her stroller, mother bending to soothe her as passengers scrambled for luggage. Suddenly, a voice pierced the din. "Let go of my child." I spun around. The woman from 14A had unbuckled the toddler and was lifting her. The mother clutched her daughter's arm, panic tearing through her voice. "This is my daughter. What are you doing?" The woman's tone was steady, unnerving. "You're mistaken. She's mine. She belongs with me." Gasps filled the cabin. A man muttered, "Oh God, a custody battle." Passengers froze, unsure whether to believe the polished, composed stranger or the frantic mother. I didn't wait. "Ma'am, put the child down immediately," I commanded, stepping forward. For a moment her calm cracked. She shoved the stroller toward the mother, nearly knocking her off balance, then bolted down the aisle. "Stop her," I yelled. 2 men lunged, blocking her path. She twisted, almost slipping free, but Clara grabbed her arm with iron strength. Together we held her until security boarded. Police arrived quickly. They checked documents, passports, airport cameras. The truth surfaced. The toddler was the mother's. The woman in pearls had no connection. Worse, she carried a pattern. Multiple reports of attempted abductions at different airports. Always wealthy in appearance, always serene, always targeting exhausted parents. She knew how to manipulate perception, how to weaponize appearance. The mother clutched her child, sobbing as officers led the woman away in cuffs. I stood frozen, sweat soaking my uniform. I'd faced turbulence, medical emergencies, even a fire alarm once mid-flight. But nothing compared to the cold horror of nearly watching a child disappear in plain sight while dozens hesitated, clouded by appearances. That night in the hotel, I couldn't sleep. I replayed every moment, the stare in the terminal, her hand on the stroller, her calm, deliberate voice. I thought about how quickly the crowd doubted the mother, how easily they leaned toward the polished stranger over the desperate parent. And I thought about the little girl's cry, reaching only for the one person who mattered. Sometimes horror isn't hijackings or fiery crashes. Sometimes it's pearls and perfume. Sometimes it's how quickly people trust the mask of wealth over the raw fear of a mother. I will never forget that flight, and I will never again assume danger wears a certain face. Because evil can sit quietly in 14A, smiling behind designer sunglasses. I never believed I'd build a career among the clouds. If someone had told me 2 decades ago that I'd end up a flight attendant, I would have brushed it off with a laugh. At 21, I was living in Detroit, struggling through college classes while holding down shifts at a corner cafe. Back then, my goal was to eventually run my own bakery. But fate had other ideas. When my mother was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer, I set all of that aside to take care of her. After she passed away, the house grew unbearably quiet, and I couldn't stay there any longer. A cousin who worked with an airline suggested I try applying. "You'd fit right in," she said. "You've got patience, and you know how to keep a smile even when you're worn down." I applied, endured weeks of training, and by 24, I was in uniform. Those first years nearly broke me: jet lag, loneliness, and passengers who treated me like part of the furniture. Yet there were moments that reminded me why it was worth it. A child drawing me clouds in crayon, a soldier whispering thanks after I handed him an extra snack, or an elderly couple clasping hands through a red-eye flight. By the time I reached 41, I had spent nearly 20 years with Northwind Airlines. The routines felt like instinct. Stock the galley, check in with the crew, memorize the passenger manifest. I had flown every type of route imaginable: quick domestic hops, grueling 12-hour international runs, even medical transport flights. I thought nothing could surprise me anymore. Then last winter changed everything. That memory still lingers. It was December 14th, and I was on Flight 917, an overnight trip from Denver to Boston. 6 hours. Nothing unusual. My assignment was mid-cabin duty, a balance between helping in business class and covering economy. The crew that night was solid. Our lead, Marissa, with 3 decades of experience and a voice that could silence any outburst, and Elias, a 23-year-old rookie still carrying the glow of wide-eyed enthusiasm. His energy was contagious, and I secretly admired it. Boarding was calm that night. Mostly business professionals, a few college students going home, and a handful of weary families. I leaned near the gate wall with Marissa as we watched them shuffle in. "Any plans for Christmas?" she asked. "Visiting my brother in Boston," I answered casually. She nodded in agreement. Elias came bouncing over, blurting about the forecasted blizzard in the northeast. "They say it's hitting tomorrow." Marissa rolled her eyes, dismissing him. "We'll be on the ground by then." I smiled, but the word blizzard sat uncomfortably in my mind. We began pre-boarding, assisting wheelchairs, families with kids. I helped an elderly man into 12C, tucking his cane beneath the seat. "You folks work too hard," he said kindly. "Just part of the routine," I replied, adjusting his blanket. The rest of the passengers filtered in. I did what we're trained to do: observe, scan for red flags. A man muttering to himself, a woman stumbling as though drunk, a teen concealing something under a hoodie. That night, everyone seemed ordinary, except one. He entered nearly last, with no luggage, no coat, just a dark sweater, plain trousers and worn shoes that looked punished by years of steps. He strode quickly down the aisle, gaze locked forward. No glance at his ticket, no hesitation. He slid into seat 22A at the window. I frowned. From the manifest I had reviewed earlier, 22A was unassigned. 22B and 22C held a mother and her teenage daughter, but 22A was listed empty. I leaned in. "Sir, may I see your boarding pass?" He didn't move or blink. I thought maybe headphones, so I raised my voice. "Sir." Still no response. Marissa noticed, came over. "Problem?" she asked. "Passenger in 22A, I whispered. I thought it was supposed to be vacant. She checked her tablet. "It is." She tried again, leaning close. "Sir, your ticket please?" Silence. The mother in 22B shifted uncomfortably. "Is he all right?" Marissa answered calmly, then turned to me. "We'll handle it after takeoff. Leave it for now." I obeyed, though unease clung to me. Maybe a standby. Still, something in the way he sat, rigid, unnatural, left me unsettled. Takeoff was smooth at 11:45 p.m. Cabin lights dimmed as passengers settled. Marissa and Elias pushed out the drink cart while I followed, handing napkins and exchanging smiles. When we reached row 22, the mother asked for ginger ale, the daughter for apple juice. I turned to the window seat. "And for you, sir?" He stared ahead, his face lost in shadow. "Sir?" Marissa tried once more. "If you'd like something, let us know." Nothing. We moved forward. I felt an itching sense deep inside. An instinct we develop on flights. Something wasn't right. Around 2 a.m., most of the cabin slept. I paced the aisle, checking belts and blankets. When I passed row 22, I froze. The man leaned closer to the window, but his reflection in the glass didn't match his body. The reflection's head turned slightly while the real one remained still. My breath caught. Maybe fatigue, maybe the angle. I forced myself onward. In the galley, Elias yawned. "Quiet flight, huh? Everyone's asleep." "Not everyone," I murmured. Marissa caught my tone. "What is it?" 22A, I whispered. "He hasn't spoken. No bag, no record." She double-checked, frowning. "That seat is empty in the system." My skin prickled. "Then who's there?" She shook her head. "Keep watch. Don't alarm anyone." At 3:30, the girl from 22C came trembling into the galley. "Excuse me." The man by the window. "He keeps leaning toward my mom when she sleeps, just staring." Elias and I exchanged alarmed looks. "I'll check," I said, striding quickly down the aisle. Row 22 was empty. No sweater, no shoes, just a sealed water bottle on the tray. The mother stirred awake. "Where did he go?" I muttered something about the restroom, though I had been in the aisle for 10 minutes straight and no one had passed. I searched the lavatories. Empty. Overhead bins, nothing. Rear rows, no trace. When I returned, 22A was occupied again. He sat rigidly, hands folded, gaze lowered. The rest of the night dragged like a slow nightmare. Marissa pulled me aside at dawn. "We can't risk panic. Keep watch until landing. We'll report in Boston." Every time my eyes drifted to 22A, he remained there, silent, unmoving. We landed in Boston at sunrise. Passengers gathered their belongings, stretching after the long night. The mother and daughter hurried off quickly. I lingered, waiting. When the aisle finally cleared, 22A was empty again, seatbelt buckled neatly across the cushion. I touched the fabric, it was icy cold. Security combed the plane. No sign, no record. The gate logs showed no extra boarding pass, no standby, no error. Marissa filed her report. I gave mine, and Elias stayed silent, pale as chalk. The next day, my supervisor called me in. "Do you realize," she said carefully, "Seat 22A has a history. 3 years ago, same route. A passenger died mid-flight, alone, wearing a dark sweater, no baggage." I sat there frozen, hands trembling. That night in my hotel, I scrolled through my phone. I had snapped a photo of the cabin during boarding to text my brother, proof of another long shift. On the screen, row 22 was clear, only the mother and daughter visible. The window seat was empty, yet I could still feel the icy brush of fabric against my arm, still hear the girl's hushed voice, "He keeps staring at my mom." And I knew, without doubt, that some travelers never stop flying. They just remain in the skies, forever.